People once believed that when a theatrical run ends, a crow carries their film to the land of the archival transfer. But sometimes a transfer so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the film can't rest. Then sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that film back to put the wrong transfers right. It can't rain bad video masters all the time. Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. In this video I'm going to be reviewing the new UHD and 4K master of the iconic 1994 film The Crow, which has seen a variety of, frankly, screwy video masters in the past. So this film finally getting a solid video presentation without gigantic video transfer issues is really quite surprising, because I had kind of given up hope that it would ever get a solid release and had actually avoided all of the various screwy issues of previous releases. And whenever I rewatched the film, I was just rewatching one of the standard Laserdisc copies, as this is a title that's very common, had a really nice Laserdisc master back in the day, and is a cherished favorite amongst collectors in the community. So it was really unfortunate that the film was cursed with a variety of video issues, and now has finally seen a transfer that actually is good, astoundingly. So it's a release that I think most of us were not expecting, and really the only positive to come out of the atrocious Don't Even Bother With It remake that was released this year. As is common whenever there's a remake or reboot attempt with any property, we hopefully then see some attention paid to the original in the video realm by hopefully getting a new restoration or at least a new master and release that would hopefully fix issues of the past. And thankfully I can say right off the bat that this release thankfully does. Of course, this is a film that truly deserves a deluxe special release. Not only is it a cult film with a devoted following, but it's a very special film for a lot of different reasons. It's, of course, translating James O'Barr's iconic comic to the screen, but doing so in its own particular fashion. It is one of those works that is not merely an adaptation, but almost a sort of parallel retelling of the same story, and sort of carving out its own unique niche within the same world. So it does not repeat everything from the original comic, nor is it done in the exact same style. But what it does is actually manage to translate the spirit of what O'Barr put on the page, and the whole idea of the film and returning from the dead to avenge loved ones and essentially get some form of justice, if only to gain a certain sense of closure, is such a universal idea that the film and the core story idea can appeal or resonate with anyone, which is, I think, part of the story's everlasting appeal and why there have been so many attempts to continue this story as a franchise, even when it doesn't really seem like it's a story that needs to be turned into a franchise or continued in a remake. Of course, the film is most well known for the tragic accident that killed Brandon Lee during the production, towards the end of the shoot, I should say, and necessitated a break in the filming and reworking and restructuring the materials that had not been shot to complete the film. It is essentially very close to how it was originally planned, but there were several changes that had to be made, and even the decision to continue and actually finish the film to release it, as everyone involved was still dealing with their grief and shock, and it was really everyone sort of coming together and wanting to finish the film as a testament to what Lee put into it it, and his absolutely breathtaking performance that is the heart, soul, and lifeblood of this film. That's why it was so important to finish, and it is a fitting testament to what he was trying to achieve, I think. I think everyone gets that. It's just one of those performances that, even if you didn't know anything about the tragic real-life story, there's so much of this person put into this film that you just get the sense that they were giving it 110%. And then you read about his career and where it was going in terms of his trajectory, and that he was essentially a star on the rise. And this is really the first role that had resonated with him so deeply that he felt like it was truly great, legitimate work, and that he was essentially, going in every day and leaving everything in terms of effort and energy in each individual scene and setup. And all of this comes through the film. And it's Lee's performance that is the sort of foothold for the audience in terms of it's the foundation for them to hang on to in order to connect with this sprawling dark city of a world that director Alice Proyas is creating. And it's very obvious that this is sort of the forerunner to what he would do 4 years later in Dark City. And that was a project he had already been sort of working on. And it's also got a lot of the visual elements that he had already been working with in his career in music videos. And that's another core element of The Crow that really informs a lot of the world building, and also where all of the various crew and personnel were coming from. Most of them were coming from the sort of explosion of creativity in the field of music videos, alongside other contemporaries, most notably David Fincher, who would in the next year come out with Seven, that has a lot of similar aesthetics in terms of having a very gritty neo-noir type city aesthetic and extraordinarily stylized visuals. But with The Crow, you also have it as being essentially a lower budgeted film that the major studios didn't really have a lot of faith in. And so they're also having to rely primarily on what are now termed old school practical effects. So the film is filled with some really beautiful miniature work, but also some occasional matte paintings and things. And everything that is done, right down to the model work, is sort of done with a sort of ragtag aesthetic of it's a smaller production that's having to work longer days and push themselves to try and overcome the hurdles of being stuck with a smaller budget and not necessarily getting as much support or money as would have been helpful to a production of this nature. But that does infuse a certain quality, a certain spirit in The Crow that is... basically, it's trying to achieve something and manages to do so against a great deal of odds imposed upon it. And that, again, links it back to the original comic, which was part of the major independent comics movement and became a success in spite of that. So it's one of the many connections I think you can make between the film and the original comic in terms of how it was received by the general public at large. The only issues I've ever had with the film, and I think what some people kind of point out in terms of talking about the overall story structure and how the film's version of the story at times has tendencies that are more typical to a standard superhero film in terms of the narrative structure, and some of the story elements being seen as maybe a bit typical. I think that's the screenwriter's way of trying to take a comic that's, frankly, an original in terms of how it's structured and how it's trying to just do its own thing entirely from a natural place dictated by the story and the themes being dealt with, as opposed to telling a traditional narrative with a 3-act structure or with decided beats that follow in a linear fashion. The original comic is not about any of those things. That's part of what makes it so unique. It's its own thing that reads in some areas almost like a charged, extraordinarily poetic and emotional fever dream. Well, that doesn't necessarily translate to a feature film, especially not in 1994, when the whole notion of adapting comics into motion pictures was not something everybody was on board with. And this is still in the aftermath of Batman 89, which influenced studios to try and do their own superhero movie version of Batman 89 without necessarily understanding how that worked. So there were some concessions that had to be made, and I do think the film's version of the story overall is very good. I just think that some of the elements are a bit more of a traditional movie style. There's nothing wrong with that. It essentially doesn't have the completely raw feeling of storytelling that you find in the original comic. Few things are going to get that level of completely emotionally raw. That's why the comic is such an iconic work. So I can understand people criticizing the actual script of the film for certain reasons, but it doesn't detract from the overall experience because the spirit of the film is so pure that it manages to replicate a lot of the impact of the original comic in the film medium, because this is a film with a fully realized world, from its production design and its visual aesthetics, and of course the sound design and usage of music tracks throughout, spotted from contemporary artists or along a similar theme of essentially alternative and getting into industrial. And these themes even carry over into Graham Revell's actual score for the film. So everything is unified. It's not just a film with intricately designed photography to try and make the most out of the sets and keep to a visual aesthetic of limiting certain color usage and trying to play around with the black levels to always ensure that the images are of a very gritty, grimy, dark place to fully visually symbolize the themes of the story. It's that all the aspects of the production are unified. So when you have scenes that are entirely new or unique to the film, they go perfectly hand in hand with scenes that are perfectly replicating individual moments from the original comic. And thus, when you have additions from the screenwriters, they don't feel out of place. They feel fully unified in the film's version of the original Crow storyline. And it's one of those films where everything comes together and works perfectly. And it manages to perfectly recapture the spirit of the original work while being something completely on its own. And I think the connections to Proyas's later Dark City are perfectly obvious. This film can be seen in a great number of ways, I think, as not just a precursor to Dark City, but in some ways a sort of working version 1 because it's got a lot of the same aesthetics and themes and some of the same visual style that would be elevated and modified further in Dark City. And again, that was a project that Proyas had sort of had in the works and was something that he wanted to do, and even talked to Brandon Lee and others on the set about it. So I think there's definitely some of the DNA of Dark City here in The Crow, obviously. But it remains a film that is a true experience. It's a film that you essentially re-enter into the world of every time you rewatch it. And in that sense, it really closely links with Blade Runner, which is another film that basically does its own thing with the source novel of Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and manages to translate the spirit of Dick's original novel so the film matches the source novel in tone, even though it goes a completely different path and has completely different events and a different ending. It spiritually is the same in terms of the core story themes. And I think The Crow is very similar, and also, of course, both films essentially feel like an experience. They are a world you enter to and then essentially are a fly on the wall with the individual characters throughout the scenes. They are not simply on a soundstage with flat lighting. They are both films that essentially live and breathe in a particular way. They are films to be experienced. And for all the films that Blade Runner influenced, and The Crow is certainly one of them, I think The Crow is one of the only ones that manages to not only have its own unique identity, but also have its own version of creating an entire world that feels like a real, not very fun place to be. So again, it lives and breathes on its own. And actually, I think that is the greatest connection to Blade Runner, not the visual aesthetics having some suggestions of Blade Runner, which it certainly does, is anything in this type of genre of having a dark city or metropolis that's quite a miserable place to be in is going to have some Blade Runner influence. But actually, I think it's the experience quality of the film feeling so completely unified that it more resembles an experience that you return to rather than just sitting through a superhero origin movie, hitting the beats, the birth of the hero, and trying to get some sort of justice by the end and defeating the final villain. Just because you have those elements, it doesn't actually mean that's what the film is about, because we still remain with the core themes of what James O'Barr had in his original story. It appeals to so many different people because the idea is universal, and it's also tied into a means of trying to find some way to deal with the intense, crushing grief that cannot ever be, fully subsumed. So it's a film that I think really grows over time. It grows with rewatches, and I think that also helps to explain the cult audience. But as Alex Proyas has said on a number of occasions, it is really Brandon Lee's film. That's one of the reasons why, of course, it is dedicated to him. But you just feel his presence in every frame of the film. And you just know that had the tragic accident not happened, that he would have been a major star. This is one of those star-making performances. Not that he or anyone is conscious of this, in terms of putting that in front of the story and the character, but it's such a total performance. And I think both Lee's performance and the film itself have been enormously influential in the years since. I don't think there's any film that it has some of the themes of The Crow that don't owe it some debt of gratitude. I think there's obviously an influence on everything from The Matrix to even the version of the Joker we see in The Dark Knight. I think has a great deal of Crow DNA in terms of the overall style and appearance of the character and the way that character comes in and out of the narrative and the Dark City. So it's a film that I think has a much greater influence than people actually give it credit for. It was not a gigantic success on the original release, mostly due to, of course, Paramount deciding they didn't want anything to do with the film, and Miramax being the ones who picked it up after Lee's death, and the then attempt to come back and actually finish the film and do the absolute best that they could, with the idea that it was going to be essentially a tribute to Lee and allowing the public to see his last performance, to see what he had worked so hard on. And again, you see this film, and even seeing it for the first time, you truly feel that. It is one of those films where it is unfortunately impossible to fully remove or divorce yourself from thinking about what actually happened in real life. But it certainly adds a poignancy, and even greater poignancy to a film that already had a great degree of poignancy. That also means it is quite difficult seeing the various sequences where the Crow is shot, and of course having the abilities as seen in the film of being essentially invulnerable while on his mission of attaining justice. It's impossible to not think about the actual tragedy that really happened. But again, it adds an additional layer of poignancy to a film that is beautifully crafted and beautifully made. And for those reasons alone, it stood the test of time. But then you add in the emotional weight and the poignancy of the film, and it remains one for the ages. It has not dated. And the 1990s elements that some may say are dating actually make it timeless, because the world is so beautifully realized and so like but unlike our own. There's a particular realistic unreality in terms of the production design that the specific 1990s bands, artists, and musical cues actually make it feel like some singular alternate universe, much like what we saw in the original comic. So again, everything comes back to what James O'Barr had put on the page. So really the film does manage to translate O'Barr's original comic in terms of its spirit, even though it's not doing everything as it was in the comic, panel for panel, page for page. I think the only thing anybody could really do with The Crow as a property in terms terms of doing another film or doing something with it is to try and build upon that and do something entirely different that is still within the general parameters, or doing a direct adaptation of O'Barr's original comic, neither of which have really been done. The various films and other projects have usually been attempts to just take the intellectual property, as it's referred to, and spin it into other areas, or simply regurgitate what they thought was successful about the 1994 film, which is, I think, what the Miramax sequel attempts really did. And then the recent remake of this year is really just seemingly the bare minimum attempt to use the name and some of the iconography, and then just do something incredibly generic without any spirit or heart to it, which is what makes the original film so special. So outside of some of the attempts in the comic realm that I've read a little bit of, I don't think anyone's been able to really do anything of substance with The Crow in terms of other projects. And I think this is one of the intellectual properties that really, if you don't have something truly special to bring to the table in terms of taking it to a new place but still being respectful of the original source material, if you have nothing to add, I don't think it should be done, essentially. Because the 1994 film is so exquisitely crafted and put together, and Brandon Lee's performance is so central to it really is the heart and lifeblood of that film, even though all the performances in the film are truly excellent and really serve to make the film feel fully lived in and like a completely separate world. But Lee's performance, as Proyas says, it really is the film. Everything else surrounds that. If you were to remove Lee's performance from the story, everything else would still be great in terms of the other elements, but it wouldn't have that unifying core element. The heart would be missing. You'd have to try and replace it with something else, or you'd have to move everything around and reformulate everything to try and cover that up, or do it differently. You couldn't make it exactly the same way. And because of the tragic events that happened, the film is what it is. It is the best that they could do to actually complete the work that they had all started on, and to get it into a proper release version that maintained that original spirit of what the production was about, and do so as a tribute to Lee and what he had contributed, what he had put into this film. So again, if anyone wants to do something with The Crow as an intellectual property, it requires a lot in terms of bringing something new and doing something that actually means something. And that's why I think people are correct in saying that it's probably best to just leave it be and leave the 1994 film as the iconic film that it is. I think it's far more than just the cult film that it's described as. It's a film that, while it's relatively well known, it's not talked about as much as you would think, and I think more people actually do need to see it. So that means that finally having a great video master is really important, because it has had a history of really crummy masters throughout throughout the DVD era, but especially in the HD era, as all of the Blu-ray releases are really flawed or bad or frankly terrible for various reasons. If you've ever seen the past video releases on Blu-ray, you'll know that the transfer issues across them ranged from heavy digital noise reduction, framing issues, color timing issues, encoding issues, and fans have even tried importing various releases such as the Japanese HD releases on their Blu-ray releases. So it's been a whole variety of issues. And again, I never picked up any of those because I just knew how crummy they were, and I didn't want to sit through a film I greatly enjoyed with that level of picture compromise. So for years, I've just been watching the Laserdisc releases, which had a great master for the time and also pretty much formed the basis of what the original DVDs were, but there had not been a definitive upgrade, and now I think there finally is. So to talk about the picture quality and overall transfer of this release, first I have to say this does carry the Paramount logo on the case because it's distributed by Paramount. And if you're knowledgeable at all about physical media and home video releases and film transfers in the modern era, you'll know that Paramount is the most notorious studio for overprocessing film transfers to treat catalog titles as terribly as possible. There is no entity worse than Paramount, as they try to pretend their destructive work is actual film restoration. So when you see Paramount involved, then you immediately get leery and very worried. But thankfully, this seems to have been done entirely by the people in the Miramax division. And this is merely Paramount doing the actual distribution of the release. And since the actual disc presentation and encode is solid, I don't think they did the disc encoding either, which is great because Paramount is literally the worst at disc encoding in the entire industry. So just so you'll know, this release really doesn't have any of what we traditionally associate with the horrendous Paramount problems. So this is the one UHD that carries Paramount logos on it that you can actually purchase and know that the video quality will be what it should be. I mean, if anything, there should be a crow who can come back to avenge films destroyed by Paramount. I couldn't resist. So as for the film transfer, this is a new 4K scan and master that's also been granted Dolby Vision HDR. This is without question the first modern transfer of this film that I have seen that does not have some glaring problem. So to have this come out after the years upon years of screwy masters and not very good Blu-ray releases and thinking that this film would never get a proper video master, it's stunning. It looks absolutely fantastic. I think the overall appearance, the color timing, the grain structure, everything looks about as good as I think it could be. I am absolutely stunned that this film has finally gotten this level of quality care. And again, I think it's entirely due to the fact that there seem to be new people doing Miramax titles in-house and then merely using Paramount as the distributor. Because had Paramount been the ones behind this, oh boy, it would be another of their Paramount atrocities in terms of the video presentation of the original film elements. The Dolby Vision HDR is handled, I think, very tastefully because this is a film that does have a lot of darkness, but also it does have quite a bit of flashing and strobing areas, particularly in the nightclub scenes and the underground band performances, and also the various bars and the street lights outside and some of the fire and explosions, of course. So doing an HDR presentation of this film can be very tricky. I think it is done exceptionally well for the most part, and I'm very thankful that it was granted Dolby Vision, which is far more nuanced than HDR10. If this had been a standard studio release in HDR10 or even Dolby Vision not done very carefully, as most studio releases are, I think it could have been very garish. As for the Dolby Vision here, I think it's quite well done. The only thing I noticed is if you're a bit sensitive to HDR on catalog titles, there is one spot in particular where it is quite a bit bright. That's during the end of the epic shootout sequence, which concludes with the crow going down into another area and continuing to beautifully dual wield, but now the room is only illuminated by giant flashes, and it has a sort of strobe effect. It's a bit brighter, obviously, now that we have HDR. It would have been brighter on original release prints in terms of the intensity of the light, as opposed to what we've seen on all the video masters of the past, but even those were a bit bright there. So if you're sensitive to bright lights, that might take you out just a little bit, but that does seem to be really inherent to the original source. The same goes for all of the original optical effects work, the model shots, and all of the matte paintings and other things. They do have some inherent wear and light movement and things, but that is merely due to the fact that they were all analog processes done by hand. They were process shots that had to be composited, and it's really wonderful to see that they don't seem to have been messed with. That's something that Paramount and a lot of other studios will go in and mess around with. Paramount is especially notorious for this, and that's something that no one needs to do, because those shots were made a particular way by hand, and to go in and mess with them is to actually mess with the historical integrity of the film's production. And with this film, the fact that the effects are almost entirely practically done, it gives a certain charge and energy, and again separates the world of the film from the very clean digital world we're used to now in terms of the films we see everywhere. So there's a certain hand-sewn quality in a way, and that again goes back to the theme of the film having a sort of ragtag effort of everybody trying to overcome the smaller budget they were given, and that sort of can-do attitude of people who really wanted to do the best work they could regardless of the production hurdles they had, trying to overcome those. That's a particular quality that you can never recapture. It's something that's intrinsic to the original production, and it was really nice to see that it doesn't look like any of the original effect shots were messed with. So I think this as a transfer is about as good as it can be. The only thing that I quibble about is that while the bitrate in terms of the encoding is quite good, it's averaging in the 70 megabits per second range. So I would like to see that higher. I think all UHDs of catalog titles should be at least in the 80s, if not in the 90s to 100 megabits per second range. And of course, there's ebbs and flows, but on average, this as a transfer that's sitting somewhere in the 70s and drops sometimes down to the 40s and 50s. It never affects the transfer. There's no problems in terms of any encoding artifacts appearing, but in my opinion, I would have liked to have seen this have a fully maxed out bitrate presentation, something more akin to what we see in the best of boutique label releases, but even most boutique labels don't always do great encoding jobs. So it's only certain ones like Arrow and a few others who frequently have really nice fidelity and motion encodes. But this is still really well done. But my only quibble would be that I wish the overall bitrate was a little bit higher. But again, it never causes any encoding artifact issues or any issues in the actual transfer. It's just something I like to look for in any transfer I'm evaluating. And while it's still far superior to most studio releases, and certainly, the best encoding I've ever seen on a release that has a Paramount logo on it, because they seemingly didn't have anything to do with the disc itself, thank goodness. But I just wish it was a bit higher, essentially. On the audio side of things, the film is presented with its original mix in a lossless 5.1 DTS HDMA presentation. This seems to be the exact same 5.1 track found on the previous Blu-ray releases. So thankfully there is no garish audio remix with brand new effects and all the problems that plague films that for whatever reason rights holders insist on remixing. But if you've seen the film before, especially on past releases, you may get the sense that in areas this 5.1 track, that again seems to be the same for the Blu-rays, may have been processed a little bit because it doesn't quite have the same oomph factor to it as past releases. This is something that I've seen discussion about online, so thankfully it's not just me. But while it still sounds fine and most people will have no issue with it, it never quite recaptures the feeling that one associates with the film if you've watched it a lot over the years on home video, especially going back to the Laserdisc releases, which had the original 2.0 Dolby SR Matrix mix and the original 5.1 mix as the film had come out in the time time where discrete audio had taken hold of the industry. So it had its original mix in two different forms where the sound comes across a little bit differently due to the actual formats. Even at the time, it was a home theater demo title because it had just a wonderful presence to it, even if it wasn't the most impressive technically in terms of the overall sound design, because it wasn't a gigantic tentpole budget in terms of the film. There is some of the lower budget that comes into play, but it's an exceptionally impressive mix for a lower budgeted film that's also really trying to generate a ton of atmosphere. And on this particular presentation of the audio mix, it just never quite feels as satisfying. There is still a great deal of the boomy low end that's always been a part of this sound mix in terms of the overall design aesthetic, and that ties into the overall production design and the music cues used throughout the film, both the actual soundtrack and the original songs that are used throughout. So it still sounds very good. I just don't think it sounds as good as it could be, and it does seem like at some point there was some EQ applied, maybe a little bit of noise reduction, or tweaking the sound mix a little bit. That's just the overall impression that I get, and I've seen other people feel the same way. So again, it's not something that is just my ears playing tricks on me. It's something that I've noticed a number of other fans and home video enthusiasts have felt or expressed about both this UHD and some of the past Blu-ray releases. So this seems to basically recycle the same lossless 5.1 version of the original mix. But if you do have older copies of the film, I would suggest checking those out, whether it be DVD or Laserdisc, or even the VHS release, which would have a hi-fi version of the original 2.0 mix. And this being a 1994 film, I think retaining the original SR mix is important because a lot of films were still mixing for the matrix stereo process in terms of working around the parameters of it, and 5.1 discrete was still a newer thing. So I think for all early to mid 1990s films, the original 2.0 Dolby Stereo SR mix needs to be preserved, and I wish that was on here so people could actually compare them. And also, it would be a great addition for people who are just watching films on soundbars or do not have an actual home theater setup, because the original Dolby Stereo SR mix, due to the matrix format, is designed to perfectly collapse down into two-channel stereo and still give you a wonderful sound presentation. And that would overcome the issues people have with dynamic range compression of having 5.1 or greater crammed down into stereo or mono. Now to talk about the packaging and artwork, the standard release has a really nice cover image and slipcover, which is obviously using the original one-sheet poster artwork. And in spite of studios insisting on making new cover art mock-ups, I think this is really well done, and it's at least using the original poster image in a nice creative way, and it also signifies this as the 4K master and 4K UHD release. There is an alternative steelbook that seems to have sold out pretty quickly with rather nice artwork, but I actually think this standard release looks fantastic, so I'm actually very pleased with the overall design. I think they actually did a really great job, even though I myself would still prefer to have the original theatrical poster artwork. There is a nice reflective quality, so this is one of those slipcovers that has that sort of sheen reflective effect. The rear has some nice imagery, but otherwise is relatively standard. The case itself has the exact same artwork, so there's nothing different. Inside, we just have a single UHD with the typical generic plain Paramount label. Unfortunately, there is no Blu-ray included here, which is something that's common to studio releases, but I think is really not helpful to consumers, because really at present, I don't think there's a way to get the 4K master on anything but the UHD or 4K streaming, and I think it's always helpful to include a standard Blu-ray of the new master that's been properly encoded, so that way people can upgrade if they don't have 4K capability, or you have a nice 1080p SDR version for whenever you may need it. In terms of the supplemental features, we do actually have some new supplements, which is great. The real draw to this in terms of those new extras is the new featurette talking with the film's production designer, It's split into 3 parts and really well done, with a lot of really great production imagery, storyboards, production sketches of the sets and visual aesthetic as it was being developed, and it runs about 24 minutes overall, so really wasn't a need to split it into 3, but it's at least a lengthy enough conversation to actually get into the film's aesthetics, the world of the production design, how the main crew was coming out of music video production, and how that sort of fed into the visual aesthetic of the film itself, how it was a sort of natural progression from what they've been doing in some really iconic music videos of the era. So that's a fantastic piece. I wish it was even longer, but at least it's nice and lengthy enough to where it's a good conversation. Then the only other new extra is an interview with producer Edward R. Pressman, but it's really more of a promo piece for the Sideshow Collectibles figure of the Crow, and it's basically a few minutes where they're just sort of talking in generalities, and it feels more like a commercial for the new really impressive but pricey statuette or figure of the Crow from the film. So if you're going to that extra looking for it to have a lot of production information or for the producer to talk at length, you're not going to get that. It really feels like something that was designed to be uploaded to YouTube. So I guess it's nice that it's here, but unfortunately you don't really get anything out of it other than promoting Sideshow Collectibles has a new release. Everything else is actually legacy extras from past releases. I think this has most of everything, but I don't think it has absolutely 100% of everything from all the various Blu-ray and DVD releases. I could be wrong, but I think this has most but not absolutely everything. So at least this will give you a more solid bit of additional information, but I wish there had been more new supplements because while it's great we do have these legacy extras, I think only some of them are really rewarding, and there also was a story floating around that there was supposed to be a really deluxe DVD with a lot of really great extras back in the DVD era, but that got sort of nixed due to some squabbles, and so we've only gotten some extras that are more on the for lack of a better term, basic generic coverage. And so I wish there had been like a really new, insightful featurette about the production or a critic's commentary or something, something to look at the film from the perspective of 30 years later and to really get into the nuts and bolts of the making of it and the adaptation from the comic. You can sort of start to piece this stuff together yourself with the extras we have, but you also have to go and read the original comic and read a lot of online forums and articles, and you have to do the legwork yourself. I just wish there had been some more actual new supplements on here. But in terms of the legacy extras we have both of the commentaries from the Blu-ray and past releases. So we have Alex Proyas' director's commentary, which is solid, but it doesn't really get into anything that's really hyper detailed, and he's seeing the film again after a great number of years. And of course, it's also a difficult film for him to talk about given the tragic events that happened. So that's understandable, but one wishes that it was a really nuts and bolts director's commentary, but it's understandable why it isn't. But it's still a good listen, but it's, I think, at least a more insightful listen than the second commentary, which is with producer Jeff Most and one of the screenwriters, John Shirley. This track is also a solid listen, is perfectly fine, but only in specific moments do you have them actually talking about specific elements of the film that they put in there, or moments where the film differed from the comic. So it's really best to listen to this to find the moments where the screenwriter is talking about the specific screenplay elements that differ from the original comic and why they felt they had to change certain things, or how they felt they had to work in elements of the comic into more of a traditional film narrative in terms of screenplay structure of the early 1990s. So both commentaries are solid listens, but they're not the most rewarding, and so I think it would have been very helpful to have a brand new commentary, even if it was a critic coming in and talking about the film and doing real deep analysis about it 30 years later in 2024. But at least we do have both of the pre-existing commentaries ported over here, and they're in the same quality, so they still sound good. But I don't think either is as good actually as the unofficial commentary that James O'Barr did, that some fans have nicely uploaded to YouTube, so I'll link to that in the description. That's a very loose and unfiltered commentary where O'Barr talks about his experiences with the production and being on the set, and also becoming friends with Brandon Lee, and how Lee's death truly wrecked him just like it did everybody else, and how he had to come to terms with even creating the Crow in the first place. And it's very, very rewarding to listen to. So actually, I think his unofficial commentary is actually better than the two official commentaries on disc. Similarly, the interview with O'Barr that's part of the Legacy Extras is an old 4:3 standard definition basic interview, but it's conducted basically with what seems like handheld camera and a basic camera on a tripod in his basement studio. So he's basically talking through his life story and his career and how the film came together as he's working on things. So you actually see his working process. And again, it's very off the cuff, unfiltered, very direct, and very gripping to listen to. So you sit there and listen to the whole 30 plus minutes, and you don't even think about the time that goes by. You wish it was even longer. So that, I think, is really rewarding, and so I'm really glad it's been ported over here. So don't let the fact that it's very simply shot and old standard definition keep you from watching through it, because I think it very much enriches your appreciation of the film. We have the same version of the extended scenes that were removed from the film. These were done from some sort of raw film scan of a particular element. They are HD, but they have essentially lossy Dolby Digital 2.0 unfinished audio, so I assume they're taken from a work print of some type, and this scan was done a long time ago, so the quality isn't the greatest, but at least we have some version of particular sequences or additional bits from sequences that were removed from the film, and some of them I think shouldn't have been removed. I think there's one particular bit in the first major sequence that involves the newly reawakened Eric Draven that would actually help to make that first sort of sequence feel a bit more complete. So it's a good extra to study, and also will help to answer maybe a few questions you had about certain moments in the film that maybe you just wanted some more detail on. Well, they may be contained here in this additional bit of material that was thankfully scanned at some point, but it would be nice at some point if these pieces could get a new transfer and thus be better presented. The deleted footage section is actually a pre-existing montage of various bits of deleted materials or materials cut from the film at some point, but also some stills and other elements of scenes that were not used in the film. This is a standard definition upscale, so the quality is not very good, but this is basically what appeared on some of the past releases, and at least we have some version of some of this rare material to again get further glimpses of things that we don't see in the film. But again, one wishes that this stuff would get a new transfer at some point to be presented on its own and within the context of where it was supposed to have been, or at least have some text information describing what these little scraps of scenes or pieces were to have been. You get the general idea, but again, it's sort of cut into a montage and was done seemingly in the DVD era. And then we close with a trailer, but it's not the original trailer. It seems to be a Miramax trailer cut together years after the fact for either a home video release or DVD or something, and it's rather funny in how they try to sell the film, and it's just got a lot of the aesthetics of bad video trailers of the 90s and 2000s, so it's not a very good trailer made much later by people obviously not involved in the original production. At least there's some kind of trailer on here, but one would wish that the original theatrical trailer or some type of promotional material could have been scanned in HD and actually presented on the disc. But at least we have a sort of goofy later Miramax trailer. So overall, I'm still really shocked that this film finally got a great video presentation in terms of the transfer. I don't think the overall release is perfect, as I do wish the overall bitrate was a little bit higher in terms of the picture transfer. I wish the audio had both the original 2.0 and 5.1 theatrical mixes and basically had them completely as is, untouched, without any processing work. And I do wish that there were some more new supplements to make the supplements feel more well-rounded. But overall, it is an impressive release for a film that's been cursed with a lot of screwy ones in the past, and actually giving us a great video transfer in the original 1.85:1 aspect ratio without major framing problems or color timing problems or digital noise reduction, and having a tasteful Dolby Vision presentation on top of all that. The lossless 5.1 audio, while I don't think it's quite as good as it could be, at least it's a version of the original mix that still sounds good, and the film wasn't stuck with a terrible Atmos remix or something. And the overall purchase price is quite low. It's frequently on sale. And most of all, Paramount is merely only distributing this release. They didn't make the master themselves. And thank goodness for that. So this is the only UHD release that I can think of that has the Paramount logo on it that you can actually purchase and enjoy a great presentation of a catalog title, because when Paramount handles something, they try to destroy it and try to claim it's film restoration. Oh boy. So if you're a fan of the film who, like me, had not upgraded to some of the past releases due to the poor overall video quality and the handling of the various video masters, then this is really the release you've been waiting for, because finally the film has been treated properly to have a great video presentation, at least a solid version of the original audio, and at least one, I think, really worthwhile new supplement in the piece on the production design of the film. One wishes this could be an even spiffier full deluxe release, especially from one of the boutique labels. You know, one can only dream of what, say, Arrow Video would have done with this film as a big deluxe package with maxed out bit rate and an entire extra disc of new supplements. But in terms of what studio releases look like, this is far, far better than what it could have been, and thank goodness Paramount did not make the master themselves. So this is the release of The Crow that we've all been waiting for. Is it the absolute slam dunk perfect disc release that we would have wanted? No, but it's pretty darn good, and compared to what we've seen in the past, you know, it obliterates all of those. So you can definitely pick up this release and only have to hang on to older releases for some of the various extras that may have not made it over. And I think also it's nice to have the original releases, such as the Laserdisc or the first DVD, for an audio track that may be slightly less processed, and also having the benefit of being able to look at the film with its original alternate 2.0 Dolby Stereo SR track. So as always, I hope my babblings about physical media and classic films has been at least somewhat fun and informative. This is a film that I simply didn't think was ever going to have its proper time on home video. And every time I rewatched it on Laserdisc, I just sort of fell in love with it all over again. And my appreciation has only grown over the years with each rewatch, and the more I sort of study the film's production and what it was striving to achieve and translating the original comic to the screen. It's a film that certainly grows over time. It's a film that grows in your estimation. Even if you loved it the first time, it only gets better as time passes. And so I really regretted the fact that it didn't have a really good transfer, even just for HD on a Blu-ray release, as those were all inferior in various ways and, again, had a variety of issues. So when this UHD was announced, I was very trepidatious, especially because it was linked to Paramount, but I was beyond thrilled to see this actually look fantastic. And while I don't think it's a perfect release, it's darn great compared to what we've seen before, and it's very affordable. So I can wholeheartedly recommend this, which I'm just frankly stunned by. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.